Good morning and happy and Freilich Purim. We continue our learning as we are determined to learn today. Purim is the conclusion of Matan Torah, as the Talmud tells us. So appropriate to be learning some Torah here. And we're continuing the review and summary of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. We are on page 1451. Aleph Taf Nun Aleph. And now this will be, we're coming to the close of the discussion of Malachim and Neshamas, namely how the Malachim serve as a support system for the Neshamas, and in turn, the Neshamas elevate the Malachim. Like we said, Hine Sulam Mutzav Atza, like a ladder, the ladder of prayer of the Neshamas. Sulam is also the Neshama, like we learned, and on this ladder, the Malachim are Elim v'Yardim Bei. So he didn't talk so much about the Yardim, but earlier we did learn that the Malachim also bring down energy just as much as they get elevated, just as much as they carry energy up. But here he's interpreting it more the Aliyah of the Malachim. And that's why Tefillah is structured Mamata L'mayla, that first you begin by talking about more the divine as it relates to existence, and Psukkah de Zimra, Bechus Yetzer, talking about the Malachim, they're all defined and finite creatures. And from them you climb Mesayemes B'dvarim Elyenim. And from there you move to higher level topic, which is Shema and Shemoneh Esrei. So the Neshamas come down below, which is meaning that that's the Sulam Mutzav Arza, the ladder as it's below on earth. But the root of the Neshama is an Atzmus Ein Sof, and that's why through them happen all the Yechudim, and that's the Malachim Elikim, Elim v'Yedim, because the Neshamas caused the Malachim to elevate, because the Malachim were supporting the Neshamas, so they in turn receive, as we discussed in the previous class, the different reasons for it, they receive in return an Aliyah. They themselves cannot elevate to that level. Like that's what it says, that amidst the Malachim that are stationary and remain on the same level, come the Mahalchim of the Neshama, the movement of the Neshama, and also causes that the Malachim should be elevated to a higher level. That concluded one part of what we learned yesterday. The next part begins another section where it says, now we'll understand a verse in Shir HaShirim that talks about Achalti Yari im divshi. I ate the honeycomb together with the honey. Now, obviously, that's a mashal, it's a metaphor for what he says here, for Krishma and for Bichas Yetzer. We're going to learn later. Right now, honey is going to be Shema. Yari, the honeycomb, which is like the support of the honey, on page 1453, he's going to tell us that is Birchas Yetzer that comes before Shema. So the Yari and Divshi, this is taken from the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, where he explains these two levels. So now we're getting a little deeper into, you could almost call it the significance and the kavana of Shema and Birchas Yetzer. Till now we learned Shema is the main avodah of Neshamas, which talks about the unity of the divine. Birchas Yetzer is the praises and the Ava V'yira, the love and reverence of the Malachim, that prepare the animal soul and also help transmit love and reverence to the divine soul in Shema, because the Neshama is down here on earth. Here he's going to talk more about the very avodah itself. So what did we learn? Why is honey compared to Shema? So he began to explain. Because Shema, the purpose of the Hisbonenus, the contemplation of Shema, is not just a philosophical, theoretical contemplation about divine unity. Even if we're to say Shema itself, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we know that everything in Torah is meant to be applied. But here, Shema continues. After Baruch Shem, Kved Machus Le'elam Vod, he says, V'ahavta, es Hashem Elokecha. And I'll just add, in the psukim that we've been talking about, the big operative verse, that's a big part of Ayin Beis, especially volume 2 and 3, or the first half of volume 3 at least. V'yadaita hayim, and then what does it say? V'hashavesa levavecha, ki Hashem hu ha'elekim, b'shamayim emal v'aretz mitachas ein oid. So v'yadaita is one half of it. That's the v'yadaita, to know, contemplation. But v'hashavesa levavecha become something that you emotionally experience. Another pasuk, da'as elikei avicha, v'avdua b'lev of shalom. Know God your Father, your God your Father, v'avdua, and serve Him with what? B'lev of shalom, the complete heart. I'm just adding, just to emphasize how critical it is, not just to know, but to feel. Now, I think everybody understands we live in a world, not just in this world, not just in our generation, but in generations past too, where people could become disconnected. They understand well, they have good minds, academics, scientists, thinkers, philosophers, but there's a lack of connection to bring it down into feelings and into you can have people, I mean, one of the classic examples that the Rebbe brings in a tragic way is, look, Germany was known for its science, for its philosophy, for its poetry, for its literature. And look what happened. It wasn't a third world country that you can just dismiss, okay, they're savages, beasts, they're not advanced. Germany considered itself from the Enlightenment. Germany was like from the prime forces of modern culture, so to speak, and modern advancements in science. But what happened? They had rules that governed how to protect pets, but they were able to gas 1.5 million innocent Jewish children and 6 million Jews and anyone they've considered undesirables. And I'm not just saying kill, in a methodical, scientific way. Now, of course, that was based on the fact they had no faith, they had no God, they became their own gods. But the point being made, seemingly you'd think someone who's an intelligent person would understand that you should behave in an intelligent way, in a sensitive way. And yet, and none of that came into fruition. So Chassidus talks at length about being able to have, on a contemplative level, that your mind could understand something, but it doesn't come down to emotions. I mean, very often you find people say this all the time in relationships, especially about men. They understand well, but there's a lack of emotional intelligence, a disconnect. I just wanted to point home how the possibility, and not just the possibility, unfortunately, you can be a computer, but have no feelings. It can be socially and emotionally completely not consistent to how you are intellectually. And there are many people, actually, I don't want to overanalyze it, that actually hide behind their minds. Emotionally, they feel inept or insecure or vulnerable or not accustomed to emoting and feeling. So what happens is they hide behind their minds, called mind games. They play chess. And this is a very common occurrence. Torah demands consistency and integrity, that what you understand should come into your feelings. You know, I've often quoted the contrast, even though they say it's urban legend, but it's a good comparison, even if it's only theoretical, between Bertrand Russell and the Rambam. So Bertrand Russell purportedly once said he did something unethical. He was in a relationship with one of his students. So his board, the school faculty, called him in and said, Professor Russell, you're a professor of ethics. How could you behave in an unethical way? And he responded, I also teach mathematics, and I'm not a triangle. In other words, what you teach and who you are not necessarily consistent. The Rambam, on the other hand, when you look at in Hilchos Deis, chapter 5, and he says, how do you know who's a chacham? Who's a wise person? So you'd think his answer would be the more intelligent one, the more brilliant one, more brain power, someone who has can explain things well, someone who's persuasive, someone who brings good arguments. I mean, there's a whole bunch of criteria that define a chacham, a wise person. And yet he continues and says, Ezu chacham, he says, you look at his behavior, how he walks, how he talks, how he eats and drinks and sleeps, how he treats others. In other words, none of us are perfect, obviously. Our ideals are always beyond our actions or our behavior or even our emotions. But we don't make it an aspiration. We don't deify this dissonance, this cognitive dissonance between mind and emotions. The Rambam is making clear that in Torah and Judaism, you want Hashem Echad. If I can paraphrase that term here, a unity, not just in your mind, but also to your emotions. And the more you can integrate the two, the healthier a person is. And this we all know in therapy, or I could tell you from my own experience, that's one of the most important things, is to create less disparity and less dissonance between mind and emotions. Not always easy. There are all kinds of different reasons. That said, you have a lot of people growing up in homes that they were, unfortunately, homes where they were frightened or criticized or undermined, and their self-confidence was eroded, always criticized, etc. So they grew up, they could have great minds, but emotionally they're afraid. And it's fully understandable. And you have to teach them how to develop those emotions. So now to sum up what we learned, let's bring it back here to Avas Hashem. I was talking mostly human relations, but the same can be applied. Explaining why is Krishma divshi compared to honey, sweet honey. So he's building a whole case. We haven't gotten back to the conclusion, but the story that he says, what he tells us, the case he's building is because the purpose of Shema is v'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, love, in one word. And love is dafka through his bonus, because like he said, we're talking about a real, consistent, and sustainable love. So it's not just a love that's fleeting or just comes from a reflex or from an emotional whim, not a crush, so to speak. It's Ayin Beis bonus, which makes it a ava mitis, like we discussed in detail, not just makif. Or without his bonus, it's more only makif. The ein lo kiyum klal, and it won't be sustainable. Or it'll be katnus ma'id, a very low level of, I call it immature, you can call it superficial, or a love that's like a childish love. And he quotes what we learned earlier about mutfa murgish, which was the development and maturity of emotions, commensurate with the growth of our maturity of our minds. But now, okay, so that we have. That's why you need these bonus. If it was just ava coming from a natural biological type of connection, so it's an ava. And there, actually, you could say, even though it's not sustainable in a conscious way, but it's always there, like the love of a parent and a child. But that's not that we want to have a full-blown love that you're experiencing in the fullest sense. So on one hand, you need his bonus. On the other hand, he says for this bonus, that's only when there's bonus as a chayz va'ayne, because then there's the trap the other way around. You can get caught up in this bonus and stay stuck in your mind. You can sit and learn the rest of your life about Hashem Echad and about all the levels before the tzimtzum and after the tzimtzum. I mean, Hamayrik be'echad, even though the Gemara does say there's a limit, but Hamayrik means an extended contemplation. As we know, you can learn your whole life about Hashem Echad and never bring it into any feelings. So he said the point is that to come into feelings, you need to have a chayiz v'einik. So he's adding now that even in the contemplation itself, it's not just it should be brought into emotions. For it to really be brought into emotions, you have to have we'll call chayiz v'einik. I translate it as vitality, dynamic, pleasure, passion. All these words work. It's hard to just to zero in on one word in English. But chayiz v'einik, you could say vitality is a very good word. And in other words, you can contemplate on something like he explains, and we'll discuss in a moment, and be like a dry topic, or it's dynamic, it's alive. chayes enenig b'izbanus. And he says, as we see, I'm reviewing what we've learned. It's worthwhile going over it, and then we'll continue. The Lapomim, at times, it's fitting to Purim as well, because Purim is a day of Simcha, and I know that. The Einig is not used so much by Purim, but we go from Purim into Shabbos, so Simcha into Einig. So Lapomim, a person can contemplate on a divine idea, Inyan Eliki, and understands it well. Betuv. And it's absorbed and integrated within him in a very settled and internalized way. And also his seichel is nispal, meaning nispal ala lukus. His mind is stimulated by it. Is like is inspired by it. But seichel. U'makol makom lo yispal b'libe ba'ava. And nevertheless, about his love is to other things, or it doesn't transfer over into a loving relationship with God. So it's a philosophical idea. He even loves the idea. He says clearly there's a spilus, but it's a spilus in the seichel. Why? Because it all remained in his mind. It never traveled to his heart. And what's the reason for that? Why not? Why didn't it? Because the bonus was bekridus. It's lacking chayes and einig. What's the contrast? What's the converse to chayes and einig? Kridus. So that tells you chayes and einig is also warmth. That's why I use the word passion. Kridus is coldness, more apathetic, more detached, which we know the mind can be that way. And at times just for the record, it's a quality of the mind. The mind doesn't get involved in the emotions, so it can be more objective and can evaluate in a more reflective way. However, you can't stop there. The mind has to come into the heart. So it's bekridus she'ein boy chayes ve'enig ba'inyan hamusik. He doesn't have any the vitality or dynamic or pleasure in the inyan hamusik. U'mishum ze'einu mispal b'libe ba'ava. And because of that, his heart does not get stimulated or stirred or excited or aroused, so that he should be drawn to it. See, that's the key. The mind can appreciate it, but to be drawn to it, which means that you're emotionally drawn to it, you want to be close to it, that's already ava. So why is this important that I'm emphasizing? Because you could ask the question, one second, you're saying that there was a spilus in the seichel. So why you call it kridus? It's not called, the seichel was stimulated. And now you're saying it's bekridus, but he doesn't have chayes ve'enig. So what's the difference between chayes and einig in the contemplation and spilus in the contemplation? So he doesn't explicitly state it, but to me it's obvious. The difference is the spilus and the seichel means it's a seichel dika spilus. It's an intellectual excitement. People get excited. As I said, scientists discover something. That still doesn't mean that there's an ava that you're drawn to. You may not even be attracted to it for all practical purposes, because there's that disconnect. Chayes ve'enig in the seichel adds another dimension. It adds a dimension that the mind is preparing you to be drawn to it. I want to be close to this thing, not just it's a nice idea, it's a nice concept. We appreciate many things intellectually, but not necessarily you want it in your life. Not that you don't want it, but you haven't, let's put it this way, engaged with it. You haven't contemplated, you haven't considered that maybe this is something that you should be attached to. Like I said, conceptually, it's the right thing to do or right thing. And this is a common experience as well. I think I once was reading, I was reading, I think it was a book about, a business guy was writing a book, and he said, he was involved, he was like a big CEO of a big company, and they had to make a decision about an investment. They did a lot of research. It was a serious investment. We're talking about in the billions. And he would make the decision. Ultimately, after all the research, it was pretty obvious it would be a good investment. So then they all had the options that they should also personally invest. Besides the company's money, their own money. And he did not. So he was asked afterwards, why not? Why didn't you invest in the same thing? The same research indicates it's going to be profit. He says, this product or whatever it was they were investing in did not speak to me. On paper, absolutely. money will be made. But it's not something I have my own pet projects that I like. He liked. In other words, this was not a problem financially or business-wise. He wasn't being disingenuous or saying the company can lose money. I don't want to lose money. That was not the case. He saw the value of it, and money wasn't the only thing that was a factor for him, clearly. He wanted to invest in things where he also has a personal interest. It's just as an example that you could have something that makes total sense, and you could even be excited about it because of the concept. And then there's the Av, where he says, where you nimshach love. Like he says, lias nimshach lezeh. This means to be drawn to it. And that goes back to the Yedaita Hayim. The Jews could have stood on Matan Torah and loved everything Hashem said. Brilliant. A Torah, an ethical system, a spiritual, everything the Torah provides. But there's another step. Are they getting married to God? Matan Torah was also a marriage. It wasn't just a intellectual commitment and even appreciation. So then he gave another example. He gives an example the opposite way. There are people who are mufshit min hageshem. Materialism doesn't speak to them. He doesn't specifically say which level, but you have people who they're more ethereal, they're more sublime. Some people love Gashmi, some people don't. I gave the example. You can go to a restaurant. People can be talking and consumed and obsessed with the food. And there's some people that's not their thing. They're mufshim min hageshem. Harigam shemevin esadover hagashmi. He could understand this gashmi's dikkus. He could understand that there's pleasure in a good steak or in a good cigar and a good cup of wine, a good glass of wine. The eich sheteva dover. And not just understand, but also how it's good. How some people find it to be attractive, or some people find it to be compelling. And nevertheless, lo yispal klal ba'avel hazeh. Nevertheless, he won't get excited emotionally about it. Why? Because fundamentally, at a core level, it doesn't have any taste in it. You see this many times that people, I say, al tam v'reach ein lizvakeach, things that are taste or smell. You can't argue. Some people like certain things, some people don't like certain things. I'm talking even a very basic level here. Because it says, obviously a person who's not Megushim, it could be naturally, it could also be through Aveda. People work on themselves and that they don't get obsessed with Gashmistic things. He's not going to that distinction here because it's not relevant. The point is just that you can understand the value of something and not necessarily relate to it personally. He has no time for enig b'zeh. Kamoy kein hu lehepech. Why is it lehepech? Because he's mufshit min hageshem. Here's the opposite. Someone that doesn't have a tam in gashmis. Now someone doesn't have a kishen le tam ve'enig be'elakus. He understands elakus, but he doesn't have pleasure in it. Doesn't have a tam ve'enig. Before he said chayis ve'enig, now he says tam ve'enig. So you see, these words they're all applicable, obviously. Lo yispol ba'ava. So since he doesn't have a tam ve'enig in it, he's not going to get excited in a personal, loving way. That doesn't mean he doesn't have hispailas b'mayach. There's a thing called midah shebemeichin. Doesn't use those terms here, but elsewhere. So the mayach also can, be stimulated to an extent. But this is a different story. When you talk midas, the midas that are subjective and the mind that's reflective and objective, that's also a key difference. The objective mind can appreciate something, but you have not made it subjectively yours. So even though we talk at times the mind's mila is to be objective, so it can give you an objective opinion and not be swayed by bias or prejudice or any interest, self-interest, like sheichid ya'aver einei chachamim, bribery or bias can blind the eyes of the wise. But then there's the other side. Once you have finished the reflection, it has to become subjective, or else it's not yours, or else you're not in a relationship. You understand its value, but to be in a relationship, v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, that requires the chayis v'enig. I'm thinking about it on a personal level right now. I'm thinking the years that I worked on Chazara, remembering Farbrengens, and then writing it down. So it required more than just intellectual curiosity, as you can imagine. You needed to have passion. To me, it wasn't just the Rebbe's a smart man, and I like to remember what he's saying, since I'm skilled, I have a responsibility to write it down for posterity. That was not the main driving force. The main driving force was that here's a man of God, like a Moshe Rabbeinu, coming to share wisdom that you're never going to hear again, that can change people's lives. And in a way, I felt like it was part of history, because if you don't remember it, it'll all be lost. So there were real consequences and emotional ones. And that was that. But I'm thinking, was that an intellectual passion, an intellectual commitment to make sure these ideas are preserved, or also personal? So I think there is a crossover, because at some point you become personally attached to it. And I did have no question that I had also an emotional connection to it. There was an ava to it, to the Rebbe, to the ideas. And obviously, it also is direction in life. So it's not just a concept, but also giving direction, which is applying it to your personal life and so on. But it still was primarily a mind experience. In other words, the process itself required tremendous concentration, tremendous absorption, and then, of course, writing it down. You couldn't get involved on an emotional level where you're going to, the excitement, that emotions, because that would not allow you to really remember. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm reviewing the process in my own life, how it worked. So the real appreciation came after I wrote it down. And then I read it today, for example. And then you really apply it to life, your own ava, your own connection, where you personally apply it, or to other people. So just pointing that out. So there are steps that are part of this process. That's why he starts with these bonus, but it has to end to really be, like he calls it, ava amitis, and sustainable. I'm just thinking the words. But you say this ava. You need well, here he actually didn't say for sustainability. He said you need bonus, but for it to be ava and not just remain on the contemplative, on the cognitive level, that's where you need the chayz v'enig. Okay, that's where we stopped by the parentheses. So we're not going to continue. I'm happy to take any questions. I elaborate a bit more than usual in the summary, because just felt it's worthwhile to understand all the aspects of this. But now is going to come a parentheses that goes all the way to the bottom of the page. It's almost like a half a page parentheses, which she's going to talk more about this dynamic about understanding something and the natural and love. And of course, the big question is, doesn't every neshama have a natural love to God? So we're going to talk about that more in the parentheses. But does anybody want me to clarify anything, or if you have any questions?
Real quick question. The use of the term phrase Tom va'oneg instead of Chayas va'oneg. Tom here doesn't mean reason. It means like a palate, like a taste for. Like it's
Right.
not. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one more word, if I may add to your explanation, what you just said about passion, personal attachment. Just one more word adds pleasure principle. Once in Living Torah, I heard the Rebbe said that you have to love your God with your heart, that means emotions, your neshama, that means mind, and meodecha he interpreted as a pleasure. You have to have pleasure from your relationship. And what you just said perfectly in line with how I understand the last step, as you said, to have Connie and the honey. That's exactly about pleasure principles that.
I wouldn't use the word pleasure principle, because that confuses people with Freudian psychology, and there's more talk about hedonistic or selfish pleasure. Just for the record, I wouldn't use the word principle, but I will say this. This is the exact word he used here. He used the word einig 3-4 times. Einig means pleasure. That's the word, yes, so correct.
Yes, we can definitely separate pleasure with serving God and hedonistic pleasure, but it's also the pleasure that opens all our resources.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so we'll continue now. The line that begins, Kishain le tam va'enig, middle of page 1451, the parentheses, ube'emes. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So he says like this now. So the parentheses, just keep in mind that ends at the last line. It ends at the bottom of the page. Ube'emes, in truth, says the Rebbe Rashab, Harikol neshama elikis, every divine soul, yesh lo tam ve'enig belikus, has a taste. You know, taste is a good word here because, like we said before, some people have a taste in Gashmias and some don't. Same thing here. So every neshama lekis, by nature, that's what makes it a divine soul, has a tam ve'enig belikus. Fu be'emes sibas ha'soga lekis. And now it turns it around. That's actually the cause why he comprehends Alakus. It's because it's like a father and a son, or parent and a child. So till now he was talking that the Hasaga brings the Ava. That when you contemplate, that stimulates the Ava. That doesn't negate the fact that you may have Ava dormant within you, which we do, but the actual process of bringing it alive, or bringing it to the surface, stimulating it, the catalyst is the Hasaga. But now he's saying that be'emes every neshama lekis. So we'll see where he's going with this. So let's not draw any conclusions. He's not contradicting what he said. He's going to explain it. So he's saying that be'emes, everything has a tam v'enik, because he was saying before that you could have a contemplation and it shouldn't have ava. Now he's saying every neshama has ava. Or tam v'enik is the word he's using. And that's really the sibah for hasoga lekis. In a sense, if we didn't have some type of common denominator or commonality with God, with godliness and ability to love it, you could argue, how could you understand something you have no connection, no relationship with? I think that's what he means, but maybe not, but that's how I'm interpreting it at least. The tam v'enig, the tam v'chochmeh, here we go, tam v'enig. Again, tam, I use the word taste, but tam is more than just taste. Tam means a geschmack. Einig is a pleasure. Sometimes tam means as a geschmack, a
Tastiness?
a positive taste. Huh?
Tastiness. It's tasty.
I really wouldn't use that because it's very much associated with actual the sense of taste. But in content, yes, tastiness is correct. But it's more than that. I think it's a geschmack, a pleasure, a delight, maybe. Anyway, he says the tam v'enig v'tam v'chochmeh u'be'emes inyan echad. I think he's touching upon now. Tam can also mean reason, even though it also means delight or taste. So he says like this: that be'emes they're one. Ki atam de chochmeh bo ma'atam de enig. So when a person when a person understands something, or chochmeh here is conceives of something. So what does he mean here, tam v'chochmeh? He means, I think it's a combination of when you understand something, there's a certain pleasure in that. Commotion is bar le'il. So the tam the chochmeh, the reason within chochmeh comes from the tam of einig, which we learned in volume 1, also volume 2, I think, volume 1 primarily, where he spoke about why, when a person understands something, do they enjoy it? And the best proof is when you don't understand it, you're in some, I don't want to call it pain, but you're in somewhat of frustration. Like, let's say you have a dilemma, intellectual dilemma now we're talking, trying to understand something. We all know the frustration, the doubt, the lack of clarity, it bothers you. And when you resolve it, like they say, ein simcha kataras asfekes, So there the word is simcha. There's no joy as resolving doubts. The same idea that when you understand something, there's a certain fluidness that comes back. It's like, this way you're grappling with an issue, you're struggling with it, and it's disturbing. I'm not comparing it to any other forms of anxiety, but it's disturbing. And when you understand it, there's some type of it's like you're fasting. We fasted yesterday, so you get hungry. Then when you eat, there's a certain element of resolution, a certain element of calm, even. Just using different words to explain it.
Satisfaction.
So he's saying that the chachma comes from the tam of einig, because as he explained there, einig is in keser, atik, and chachma, true wisdom, is not just intelligence; it's experiencing the reality of a higher truth. We talked about this a number of times. That wisdom is intelligence. Ultimately, is not just understanding something; it's experiencing something greater than yourself, a truth higher than yourself. And that has a tremendous element of pleasure to it. Yes, satisfaction is another good word. Also, a pleasure, there's a pleasure and satisfaction in that. Why? Because Chacham is rooted ultimately in Keser and Einig. That's what he explained there. He actually said even more than that. That Chacham is really Einig. It's all about pleasure in a higher reality that then comes down into what we call Seichel. So Seichel is not just the dissecting or the academic analysis of something. That's one part of it. That's the Seichel part. Chochmah has primarily an element of Einig in it. And that's why there's a deep pleasure when a person understands things. Just in general, we're learning Ayin Beis, when you start really getting it, and it helps you understand the world in a better way. It helps you understand yourself and the cosmos in a better way. You tell me, there's a certain inner pleasure and satisfaction from that. Now, is that an emotional satisfaction? Is it an emotional ava? We'll talk about that more later. But it definitely has an element of more than just a dry idea. There is an element of fulfillment, even of resolution. There's a certain clarity. You feel at peace with it all because it gives you guidance. You have direction. So all these things contribute to what we call tam v'chachma, tam v'einig, which is the root of tam v'chachma. That's what he's saying here. So in other words, the intelligent person or the chacham, the einig, the tam v'einig, in the tam of chachma is connected to that deeper pleasure. Now we didn't talk about ava now, emotions, that we'll get to. But he's connecting now, saying that that's why neshama that has a tam v'einig belakus, because at first it starts with a tam v'einig. Neshama is rooted in keser or higher even, and therefore it has a tam v'einig. It's like it comes from there. It's like the fish in water. That's where the neshama originates from, and that's the cause for having an understanding. And now he's connecting the seichel, the hasoga, with the einig. That's what he did right now. So it's a little. This is a pretty deep piece if you really think about it. And I don't want to go too much into it because I don't want to digress. I'm sure I talked about this at length when we learned it the first time, but I think there's enough said about let's see where he's going with this. That's the most important part. Okay, so he drives the point home very clearly here. If a person did not a taste, a sense, a tam in it, like before. Let's talk the other way around. Someone doesn't have a tam in gashmis. They just don't. Some people just not megushim. They don't have a taste in a good piece of food or good wine. I'm just using really gashmistic examples. That's it. They just don't have a tam. Now, even though he said they could understand its value, but doesn't relate to them. Here he's saying that if you don't have a tam in elikus, he wouldn't have a hasoga b'zeh. So that does seem to contradict a little what he said earlier, because he said you have hasaga a tam. So let's see where he goes with this. So I'm just pointing that out. But here he's saying if he didn't have a tam, it could be he's talking exclusively about godliness, because godliness is not something that's tangible, not a physical item. So if you don't have you don't get godliness, how are you going to have an understanding of it? But you could argue, one second, a mind philosophically could understand something about godliness. I think it means here, how could you relate to it if you don't, therefore, how could you understand it if you don't have a time? But again, I don't want to come to anything conclusive because we're in the middle of reading these sentences. So let's just keep that in mind and let's see where he's going. So he says that. Okay, so v'yochalius, and it's possible. Sheyesh letam ve'enig behelim. It's possible that he has a tam ve'enig behelim. In other words, it's not revealed, it's not conscious, but he has it within him. V'lo yeh lo hasoga b'elikus. Okay, this is getting even more dense. Now I'm thinking whether this is so negeya to the whole big picture of Ayin Beis, but we already got into it, so I can't really pull out now. Now that I'm reading it, I'm starting to think it's obviously important, or else the Rebbe Rashab wouldn't write about it. But is it important in our intention here? We learned it the first time, so fine. We're already in it. I'm going to stay. Okay. So he says, if he didn't have a tam, I'm sorry. So it could be a scenario that he has a tam ve'enig in it, the helam, and he wouldn't have asog b'elikus. So in other words, what he's saying is, without a tam, you can't have you could have a tam be'elam and not have asoga. But can you have a tam be'golia and not have asoga? Let's see how he explains. I'm just telling you that we're in the same boat here. I can't tell you the conclusion here because I'm reading it as together. So let's see where it's going. So if you're not clear, don't feel dejected. I'm also not clear. Seichel, understanding and comprehension, zeu mekeches hanefesh. That comes from the faculties of the nefesh. What he means by that is the revealed conscious 10 faculties. Chachma, bina, da, etc. V'atainuk hu etzem hanefesh. Like I said, tainuk comes from etzem hanefesh. That's why tainuk does not have a localized and defined state. Chachma, and bina, and das are 3 parts of the brain. Right, left, and particular tainug, like rotzen, we learned much earlier in volume 1, are makifim. They're all-encompassing faculties. Here he's calling it not even a faculty; he just says etzem nefesh. Valkein ha'enig belakuz be'emes kol echad ve'echad miYisrael, and as a result of that, the pleasure in elikus, every Jew has. Afilu ba'anoshim pshutim va'amei ha'oretz. Even simple people and ignorant people. People who are not, amei ha'oretz literally means earthly people. Earthy people. That's oretzes, but it refers usually to someone uneducated. Meaning, you don't need to have giluyim. You don't need to be a scholar. You don't need to be a big high level Oved Hashem. Since it's an etzem hanefesh, so it's part of who you are. That's it. Like we speak about, a neshama is always a neshama. The question is, how conscious are you of it? How much it's a manifest in your life? Another story. But an etzem hanefesh is there. Whereas koiches hanefesh, that doesn't guarantee. So you could not have chochmah. You don't have to have a sog in elikus. That doesn't mean you don't have oinig behelim. That's a manefesh. That's what he's saying here. So in other words, like the expression in Hayom Yom, he brings from the Alter Rebbe, that a Jew not he wants and not he can ever be separated from godliness. Because there's an etzem connection. Speaks about it in Tanya, chelik elikam mal mamish. Literally like a parent and a child. A parent and a child, there's nothing you do to sever their connection. It's biological, but it's more than biological. It's a fundamental connection. Now, the fact that parents and children can argue and can even be, unfortunately, tragically, have a estrangement, that's because of other reasons. Because there's Yetzer and there's other elements. But the fact is, in a healthy person, and even there, the connection never ends. There's always a connection between a parent and a child. So how much more so with Hashem? So he's basically saying, he's bringing into this picture. Now, I'm still not sure where this is going, because till now we've been talking about contemplating godliness, and that gives birth to a love of Hafa. that comes because there's tam va'enig. Now he's saying everyone has tam. Every neshama has a tam va'enig and elikus, revealed or concealed. It's there, and that's what brings asaga. Now it's possible that a person has the tam, like he just says, every etzem nefesh, and doesn't have asaga. Obviously, that's the case with many people who have a fundamental connection. You could see it sometimes. In Tanya, he didn't quote Tanya here, which is interesting, because it seems like this is literally almost the same content in chapter 18 and 19 in Tanya, where there he's starting to talk about not the love that's manufactured, I would say, that's created and born through contemplation, but the very natural ava mesoteris in every neshama. He compares it to a flame. And there he says clearly that every neshama has it, even simple people and even Amara. That's why when push comes to shove, he explains in chapter 19 and 18 as well, that if someone's challenged and said, we want you to bow down to an idol, even if they're not on any high level, it's a threat to their very connection to God, and they won't do it. That's how he explains it there. Meaning it's not connected to seichel necessarily. It's not because you developed a relationship with God. It's because there's a fundamental connection. It's like certain things, certain lines you will not cross. You may do a lot of things, but when it comes to a complete betrayal of your very essence, you're not going to, that you will not allow it to happen. In a way, Purim is that story, actually. The Mesiras Nefesh of the Yidden. So, getting back to what he's saying here, so therefore, he says, so ki basel enig zem kelim lataynu etzmanet valkena enig balakuz beemes yesh kol afilo banoshim pshutim v'amar v'niker ma'hepech. And here he literally is bringing also seemingly what it says in Tanya. And how do we see that? We see it from the converse. Ma'atzar ala richuk. So you may not see it in a conscious way because the person is not in Giluyim, you don't see the connection. But you see it from the opposite. When he's separated from godliness, he has tsar. Why does he have tsar? Pain, distress, because there's that etzem connection. Like you'll see it. You may see a child, for example, taking the love of their parents for granted. But then when they're separated, then suddenly the child feels pain. And they realize, I'm much more connected than I thought I was. Just as an example. I mean, my inclination is that this is not what it says in Tanya, or else he would have cited it. And I'm looking down if he brings it. So it could be he's talking about something different. It just, to me, it seems very reminiscent of what the idea is there. I'm just pointing it out. It's not a question really. He's just trying to understand the context. So the seichel, which is only a faculty, not etzem nefesh, so that could be not revealed. Now he said before that oinig is also not revealed, but it's there. I think what he means here, not just not revealed, that it's not there. I mean, of course, there's seichel. Every person has seichel, but there's no seichel. There's no hasag and elikus here. Even though there's a fundamental love and fundamental tam va'enig, I should say, of the neshama. But then he continues, Aval kasha yeshnu lahaseichel v'hasag b'elikus yeshnu gamkin la'tam va'enig. Okay. I'll explain this and then maybe we'll stop here because it's getting a little dense, as I said. So what he's saying is like this. You could have tam va'enig and not have seichel. But if you have seichel, there's also tam va'enig. That's what he's saying. Because there wouldn't be a comprehension of the divine if you didn't have a taste in the divine. That's how he began, if you recall. He began by saying that because a person has tam va'enig in elikus, every neshama, that's why, be'emes, that's why he also has hasagah. And chachma comes, the tam of chachma comes from the tam va'enig of etzem nefesh. Then there's a scenario, however, you could have the tam va'enig of etzem nefesh and not have seichel, hasagah. But if you have hasagah, it indicates that you have tam va'enig. That's what he's saying here. Now, why is this so vital? I really don't understand yet, but that's what he's saying. That's clear. But we're only halfway through the parentheses. So the truth is, I would love to be able to read on, but time is of essence here today. So I don't know if I have the ability to really, and I want to do justice to it. I don't want to read this quickly.
Maybe he's saying that you don't really understand.
I'm not asking for you to tell me. I know what he's going to say the next half. So,
Oh, I
I mean,
know.
I'm fine. If you want to speculate, you can. It's not, it's not a question that I'm asking for an answer. I'm just pointing out that he didn't finish yet. That was my point. He's
I
going to
understand.
explain.
Yeah, I was trying to work it out. I wasn't suggesting you don't understand, that I understand better
No,
than you
no,
do.
I'm just saying to
God
you
forbid.
that
Yeah.
I just, in case anybody here is that feels we don't have, I'm telling you, he's going to explain it. That's all I'm saying.
I see.
I say
Okay.
till now he hasn't yet. So I'm not. That's not a. At the end of the parentheses, if we still don't understand, we're going to have to analyze it. And I'm not trying to go. If you want, listen, I don't like the process. So I'm not processing right now. If I want to process, of course I can figure it out. All I have to do is read on. So I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm just telling you what my thinking is.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. Yeah, I was trying to. The point
Well,
I was going to make. Yeah.
To me, since the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain it, I don't even want to go ahead and try to figure out myself. Why should I?
Okay. Well, then I'll withhold my comment.
Well, you can read on. Maybe your comment is exactly what he's going to say, for all I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm trained not to process. That's why I refuse to process, especially when the Rebbe is still speaking. Remember, I stood by a Farbrengen. If I would process that, I would be stopping the Rebbe every 5 minutes.
Well, I'm not really processing. I'm trying to interpret what he said. So there's a little bit of a difference, but that's
I'm
okay.
talking about myself right now. I didn't talk about you.
Yeah. Well, all I was going to say is that the implication here is one, you can't say that you understand Elokus if you are not moved emotionally, if you don't feel Tamba Oneg or Chayos and Oneg, then you by definition haven't really understood godliness, because it's the etzem of the neshama is in godliness, and then when it's a reconnection, it's like going home. When you walk into your house and you don't feel home, then there's something wrong. There's a disconnect between that it's not home for some reason. Maybe you were abused at home, so it doesn't really feel like home. It's a scary place. But so, in other words, he's connecting, understanding, and Chayas and Oneg together, because he's saying you don't really understand godliness. The Shama doesn't understand godliness if it doesn't feel this vitality and pleasure. That's all I was gonna say.
It's possible that's what he's going to say. I don't know. I can't comment. We'll see.
By the way, I was just going to say this is a comment or question. I'll ask you. This is not I'm asking you a question on everything we just learned. It occurred to me that because the neshama, and I've raised this issue a couple times in the past several days, because the neshama is alienated in the goof. I mean, it's stuck in a place it's not consonant with, per se. It's the opposite of what it's made out of. So it's alienated inside the goof. But when the neshama contemplates on Elokus, it's sort of like rejoining that which it is consonant with. That's what it's comfortable with, like a fish in water. A fish is not comfortable on land. It can't even really live on land, but that's too much. That's taking the metaphor too far. But the neshama, when it reconnects with the Eibusher, and then that's the inyan of yichud, is that when the
What's your point?
neshama.
I'm not sure. What are you trying to say?
I'm saying that the notion of contemplating godliness when you say Shema is an experience of the neshama where it can reconnect with its source and at least momentarily mitigate the sense of alienation it feels in the body.
I mean, that's part of the whole discussion. Of course, that's the whole avodas hatfilah. That's why we begin with birchis yetzer, first to somewhat subdue the animal soul, so then the neshama can say Shema and connect without the impediment of the animal soul. That's what he said explicitly here.
Okay. I'm just putting it in my own words, maybe then.
Okay, fine. Okay, so we'll stop here, middle of the parentheses. We'll go over it again, more detail next time. We learn on Sunday, hopefully. So let me stop here, middle of